That would really help you in your AI journey. And we just discussed it. It's awesome to see that the room is almost full of practitioners who've been there, done that, or are doing something with AI right now. So I think really cool to be presenting Portkey to you folks. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of slides, and we'll actually do a live demo of the product. And yeah, I'm looking forward to feedback from you folks. So I mentioned Portkey is actually the control panel for AI apps, but what does that really mean? And maybe we can go through this by answering this question that we started answering in 2021. So how do you really get the confidence to launch an AI feature or an AI application, right? And this is where a lot of companies are struggling with. You've built out this great POC, it works really well, your early customers are wowed, but then where do you get the confidence to go to production and really just go live with it? So before 2021, this question was answered by a series of steps, right? You would find and clean data, prepare these training, test, validation data sets, build this nice little training pipeline, test this model, beta test it, and all of this process is a nice 6 to 8 month process where the ML team and the data science team are working together to build out this feature, and then it would work 8% of the times, which is awesome. And that's how it worked. And then you'll go on improving it for specific use cases. But then in Jan 2021, I was building this tool which was sort of like Copy.ai, and all I did was I wrote 10 prompts, connected it to the OpenAI API, and that's it. And this is on GPT-3, the private beta version. And that's it. I was presenting this to a sales team of 25, and they were just like, hey, this is voodoo, this is just not possible, how are you doing this? And it was that easy, and that's, I think, the big shift that's happened in AI over time. But then, I think week 2, this was our scene. So we got rate limited. Anybody else seeing the screen when they're building their applications? Yeah? Right. And then you got to deal with this. So then what we did was, okay, let's start to get multiple accounts, start load balancing between those accounts, start rate limiting people, build queues, and this is all engineering, right? But yeah, we've done this, okay, let's do this. And then, how do I even, like as an engineer, product manager, the designer, everybody sitting together, like we have no idea where it didn't work and what do we do about this? So then we went on and said, okay, engineers, let's build the logging system because Datadog is going to be too expensive for the amount of tokens that we need to log. So we built our own logging system. The worst idea ever, but that's how we were able to figure out what was going wrong with this particular user, and maybe then we started improving our prompts. But then every other week, there are these better, newer models, larger sized, smaller sized, task specific, and sometimes you just can't keep up with all of these models that are coming out. But then, as we talked about on the panel, your application has to be future proof, because this newer model outperforms everything else that existed today. Then you're losing out on that edge that competitors might have. And I think it's this race in which a lot of companies are just trying to figure out how do we make sure that we're using the best framework, the best technologies, not really getting caught up in that race, but are we at least testing, are we at least finding out what's new, what's coming up. And then finally, we were discussing this, right? So you've got all of these faux pas that happen with enterprise companies where somebody bought a Chevy Tahoe for $1. All of this will happen, and these are all production scenarios. It's just how do you build the right guardrails to be able to stop shipping stuff like this into production. So let's go over challenges, right? So we said there's really low visibility and control over cost and performance. There are really high switching and testing costs. Each of these APIs seem similar, but they're not exactly the same, right? Sometimes the keys are a little bit different. oh, the Google models will not take an array, but will take an object somewhere, and all of those. So how do I keep switching models and testing it out really fast? My code isn't future-proof, because every time something new comes, I have to go back to the drawing board, integrate something new, and there's regular security, safety nightmares. I don't even think we've begun to go into security so much with LLMs, because we're still dealing with accuracy, reliability. I think the security aspect is going to come out really soon. There's this guy, Simon Wilson, if you follow, he's written 100 blog posts on prompt injections. And I don't think we're taking any of this seriously, but I think very soon as RAG becomes popular and we're connecting real data to LLMs, security for LLMs will also start to become really important. So cool, so these were the challenges, we also identified and we're like, okay, what do we do with this? But we also realized that if you go back to 2012, 2013, we were facing almost similar problems with cloud infra. And because these are all ops challenges, right? This has nothing to do with AI. How do you build the right frameworks to solve these ops challenges? And we've seen DevOps does this in the traditional engineering world. So then we said, okay, what is it that you can build for the GenAI world that translates these capabilities that already exist in cloud or engineering? And that's sort of where Portkey comes in. No surprise, that's what I was building up to. But Portkey is essentially this 2-line code upgrade that essentially fixes these ops challenges. We're saying, hey, you could be using your entire application. Can we have you add these 2 lines, which is update your base URL to Portkey's gateway, and then add in a default header, and you're done. And I'll show you this. I'll show how this works. But these 2 lines actually give you the capability to now go to production with a lot more control and visibility. I'll show you how this works. And we've actually done this over 254 billion tokens since we launched over about 4.5, 5 months back. We've got over 1,200 prompts that are being managed actively on the system, extremely high uptime, and I think this is March. We already had 223 models that people were using on Portkey. This number has clearly gone above 260 today. So that's the kind of impact we've seen over time. So just a quick little bit into how this actually works and what is Portkey. So what you're doing is today, your AI application directly connects to the LLM, and then you manage a lot of stuff on the application side. Instead, what we're suggesting is, when you're switching when you add the gateway to your application connects to the LLM world through this gateway. And this gateway now has this nice little separation of concerns, which gives you routing capabilities to any model, any provider in the world. It has fallbacks, load balancing, rate limiting, access management built in. It's connected to an observability stack, so all of your logs, metrics are getting tracked, so you have visibility on what's exactly happening in your AI system. And then it also has these components of guardrails, so you're checking every input-output. You have prompt management, and then there's a security layer overall. So that's the architecture we envision, and the idea was, what does a Cloudflare for the GenAI world sort of look like? And this is what we've come up with, and this is our idea of Portkey. We're saying there are 3 things that this promises. It gives you control over your application, it gives you visibility, and just makes your application completely future-proof. So yeah, I'm going to go into the demo and show you how this works. Cool. So this is your typical OpenAI code, right? You're just creating an OpenAI client, and I'm making the chat completion. Let's say which is the most popular global sport. Americans are not computers. Yeah. So it's giving me the answer. So what's happened is the call's gone to OpenAI, it's come back, everything's fine. What I'm going to do is actually just add these 2 lines of code, which is Portkey's AI gateway now getting inserted in my application, and I'm going to make this request. Exactly the same. So there's no real difference, which is what should have happened, right? So you've actually added an entire AI gateway in the middle, and this is so low latency and extremely high reliability that your application keeps performing the same way. But what's happened in the background is, Portkey's actually been able to capture all of these logs, and if I go to Portkey and I have this filter applied, I can actually see exactly what was the request and response that came through. I can actually go down, start debugging what was the exact JSON that went out, what was the JSON that went in. This is access control, so there are engineers who have access to this and nobody else can see this data. But this is amazing, I have exactly how much did this request cost me, what was the timing, I've passed in some metadata, and this is all. In production, what you'll actually have is all of these requests coming in into this logging system. So you have requests coming in from Mistral, from Claude, and what's actually happening is I'm not changing the OpenAI SDK to the Mistral SDK at all. All I'm going to say is provide a Mistral and use Mistral 7. That's it. And Portkey is going to do the request response transformations, log everything and give you this visibility. Let's actually show you how you can use the gateway to do something more fun, right? The most common use cases we've seen is avoiding rate limiting by switching between models. So if you look at this configuration in Portkey, what's happening is it's saying retry 5 times on these status codes. And then if the request fails because of rate limiting, that's 429, fall back from OpenAI to Azure. That's it. And this would take like some amount of code in your application, and then it's tied to those specific models. But in Portkey, I could just write configurations like this, and then have your application run through. Another very common example is, Llama 3 just came out, and I want to try it. But I can only try it on 5% of my traffic, right? I just don't want to already give access on production to everybody. So what you would do in Portkey is, you'd say again, let's load balance this time between my OpenAI, which is my reliable, trusted model, and I'm going to say 95% of my traffic can keep going to OpenAI, but let's send 5% of the traffic to the Llama models. And because I have all of this nice visibility into logs and analytics, I can actually see what's the performance of the model, and then come back here and decide to switch. Now again, engineers will be like, oh, this is blue-green deployments. Exactly what it is. So you're saying, how do you build these nice little deployment methodologies within the gateway, so your application need not worry about which model is it using, what's the configuration, how's it working out, etc. It's also got caching built in, so similar queries coming in, just get served from cache, 98% faster and free. So going back, you also have this nice little 70,000 feet view of everything that's happening within your application, across cost, how many tokens are being used, what's your performance looking like for the application. I could filter it down to any model, etc. But more importantly, I can actually drill down and see who are my users, what is their activity looking like, what are the kind of errors I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis. And these are API errors, accuracy errors, all coming from a single dashboard. I could drill down and see exactly what calls are making these errors. You can see what's the performance of the cache on your system. And then most importantly, and I think this is an aspect a lot of the AI applications today miss, is how you're collecting human feedback. And this could be as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down, but more importantly, are you channeling your business metrics into an application to tell you, to give you the full feedback loop? This was the request, this was our response, this is how the user responded. And I think that's extremely important. So that's observability gateway. And the last bit, which is becoming a lot more popular now, so it was popular in April last year, and I think now it's getting more popular in production again, is having sort of a prompt library. So a lot of companies started with managing their prompts in code, and especially if you're using LangChain, and if you use LangChain, you would see that there are prompts littered all over code. You can't indent them because that introduces an extra character, but I still need to manage them somewhere. So it's all over code right now. We built sort of a GitHub for prompts, again connected to the gateway itself, where you can actually write your prompt templates, pick from any of the providers that we support. So think of this as the OpenAI playground, but for 25 plus providers, 250 models, and just test out models here in this playground itself. Once you're ready with the prompt, just use the API, just use the prompts API to make the completion call, instead of actually having to send the prompt template over again. What this enables you to do is whenever you have to update the prompt, come back here, create a new version, and just deploy it. So this new role of people, which is prompt engineering that's coming up, you can have prompt engineers take control of your application by building prompt templates, improving upon them, versioning them, and essentially collaboratively building prompts instead of just engineers having control over creating these prompts. So yeah, that's Portkey. Looking forward to your feedback and hope this was useful. If there's any questions, I'll be around. But thanks so much for listening.
Up next is Metal. So they're going to jump in on their demo.
Get on Zoom first.
After he gets on Zoom. So just be patient with us. I promise, food and drinks are still there when we leave.
So hopefully we thank you.
You're not doing
You ready? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so. Sorry, everybody, just getting my window set up. Something I do about 500 times a day, and yet still I'm sluggish at it. All right. Hey everyone, I'm Taylor, co-founder and CEO of Metal. So I'm going to give us a quick background on our team and a bit of the journey of how we got to where we are today. And I think the theme of this event is so appropriate, especially as it relates to how do we start from infrastructure and then get into the application layer, because in our case, we've actually done both. So a bit on us, and this is also how we view the market, right? In terms of how do we get to production. So for us, we actually started as a developer tool. We started as a managed service, which just took both structured and unstructured data and transformed it into LLM-ready embeddings, right? We launched out of Y Combinator at the start of last year. We even started as embeddings as a service. And that was really all we focused on, right? We didn't really know what the killer apps or use cases would be. We didn't know where the most value could be derived from this technology, but we always had an opinion that specificity and focus has always been a startup's advantage and superpower, and something that we were always looking for. So, the benefit of starting as a industry agnostic tool was that we got exposure to a lot of different industries and an understanding of how we could actually use this technology to unlock real value, meaning how do we prove out that we save our users time, we save them money, we make them money. So we got a lot of sort of exploratory data on this general platform, which again, the main focus was how do we just get data ready and served up and extracted and structured well enough where an LLM can make really good use out of it. And then over time, we started to get pulled into working with our customer base today, which is primarily focused on venture and private equity groups. So I think there was a bit of organic traction there. We had some good customers in the space, but as so happens in startups a lot, a happy accident is one of the things we were very good at, was just taking this data as a managed service. Again, not asking the developer to chunk, parse, or store this information, just doing it out of the box as part of the product. And then how do we serve that data up in a really useful way that maps to a user's workflows. And that's really what we've done here with our new focus. We launched our SaaS in January on top of the infrastructure platform. So there's really two parts to what we do. There's that data transformation piece that we started with, and then there's how do we take that information and plug it into really valuable time-consuming workflows. So just a very simple overview of how this works. I'd say the first half, the infrastructure piece really starts with organize and store. So in our case of our users, you have fund analysts who are just really consuming a fire hose of data every day to better understand a company or a market or an opportunity. You're running through piles of call transcripts, earnings reports, private decks, financial statements, and often, if you're doing diligence on these companies, it's a bit of a race against time, right? You're up against other funds, other private equity groups, other venture groups, but of course you have to be accurate. So, that's really the charge of the infrastructure piece on our end, is how can we just, without the user lifting a finger, pull out all the information that they would expect from a variety of documents, both qualitative and quantitative. And then the second half, of course, is plugging that into workflows. So, funds are quite busy, they perform a lot of functions during the life cycle. For us, again, I think a matter of focus, we really focus on the diligence process and portfolio management. So we can go over some of the highlighted use cases here today, and we can actually start with Flybridge. So we've been working with Daniel on Flybridge for a bit here, very appropriate to the theme of getting to production, as we're hopefully gearing up for that soon. But one of the specific use cases we've been working on is portfolio updates. So, if you've ever been on this side of a fund, right, where a founder sends you an update, it's the highs, the lows, the financial statement, a board deck, it's a lot of information to parse through, but it's obviously very important to understand how your investments are going. And then you multiply that by how many portfolio companies you have, and all of a sudden, there's a tremendous amount of time where you're basically picking through this data in order to get it to a usable format. So I'm going to jump into a demo here. All right. So we typically work with private data sets and mostly focus on the private side, but of course, I'm going to share that data here for data privacy reasons, so I'm going to use some public earnings as a proxy. So let's take a look at Tesla. So this is sort of the infrastructure side, right? How do you upload data into Metal, where it can then be used? So let's just add some new files here. We've got a bunch of preloaded earnings reports, presentations, transcripts. I'm just going to upload a few more. So our view is that any type of file that the investor would ultimately need to read through and pull data out of, we need to support. So PDFs, Excel, DocX, what have you. When these files are uploaded, Metal then starts to scan through them and pull out information. So financial metrics, for example, we can pull out qualifiers like quotes. We can also give you custom qualifiers that are looking for very specific industry-specific values, and then those are stored here in this data source. So one of the things that we learned is that you have this sort of rolling knowledge over time that you're trying to collect about a company, whether it's the first call you have during diligence or it's been within your portfolio for a number of years. So how do you contain that in a single view? And that's actually where the company page comes into play. So if I go to Tesla here, this is actually all of the extracted metrics from those earnings reports, and then they're pulled out here and normalized. That's another thing we do, is we take these numbers. If, for example, your portfolio company reports MRR, but you prefer ARR, we run that calculation, a reconciliation for you. So you see a lot of these standard metrics here, and again, you can filter through quarter, yearly, etc. And this is sort of the current end state of the data ingestion side, right? Like, how does this information you're collecting about a company get stored and is referenceable? But you also need to, of course, interact with it. So I'm going to jump back into data sources, and we have a couple of experiences that we provide for our users. So for one, like many companies in the space, just starting with chat. So what is happening here is that I just asked Metal about the revenue of Tesla since 2020. And this is really where the infrastructure side comes into play, is the quality of the data that we extract makes for a much more powerful chat experience, especially as it relates to quantitative figures, right, which are critical with our users. But people have mentioned a lot today, how do you trust these systems? How do you educate users that they are probabilistic and not deterministic? It is a super valid point, and it is not just applying to our users in our industry. But the way that we handle that is really twofold. So, the advantage of building a SaaS on top of an infrastructure platform is we can point to the data that we transformed and stored that is then served up in this chat experience. So here it's finished its thought on the revenue. You can see at the end of these points, we have cited sources that when you click into them, they point back to the source document so that the analyst can understand exactly where this information came from and verify it. And the second thing that we do is we also have native evaluations built into the platform. So we effectively take the answer generated in chat, and then we run that answer against the fact set used to create that answer, and then we give that a score, and we call out contradictions. These are two approaches for trust. It's not exhaustive in our view, but it's a good starting point. But again, I think that the point of education for our users is that, look, especially as it relates to sensitive data, company data, you have to check this works, so we try to build that into the experience of the application. But chat is not always the best experience, to be honest. Like, it was a great starting point. I think for a lot of companies are feeling the same thing. But let's take the example of a data room. So we have seen, because we focus on the private side, a lot of messy data rooms. And on the seller side, if you're a bank, right, you might want to bury some of the less desirable documents in there, like a lawsuit. So what we're working on is actually, and I'm just going to show you a beta feature, which we do quite often, is expanding, not just for chat, but for search. So the case here is, let's just throw this in for a Tesla query. Like let's say you're looking for Cybertruck, any information as it relates to Cybertruck. What we'll do here with this search is we'll enable both semantic and keyword search to just give you that top level view of what is in a data room, for example. And this can, once this is released, we'll have, of course, a filter list here, but what it'll allow analysts to do is how many, files are in this data room that contain the word or phrase, lawsuit, fatality, grievance, that sort of thing. So it's a lot of flexibility you need to parse through this data, and this is part of the experience, again, that we do want to build into Metal. The last piece here on the product demo is, what we've looked at so far is really mostly synchronous features. So you assume that the user is actively going through this information, trying to understand a company or an opportunity. But there's a lot you can do with LLMs in terms of asynchronous features, and for us, it's really around our assistant. So this is a asynchronous feature, which basically, instead of having an answer come to you right away, you can give Metal a prompt to run over the entirety of a data room. For example, we tested last week 150 call transcripts, about 3,000 pages, and asked to write a 2-page summary. It took about 20 minutes, so of course, not synchronous, but a lot better than reading through that manually. And in this case, I've asked for a summary of Tesla's financials, focusing on EBITDA, net income, revenue growth, margin, operating margin, and so forth. And this is the result. So I'll pull this up here. We'll be polishing the format a bit, but this is a bit more depth, right? It's where retrieval takes the top hits. This actually looks at the entirety of the data source, takes the time, and gives you a much more comprehensive answer as a result. So yeah, that is a very quick overview of where we are today. And I'm going to go back to our slides. Great. So I think, this really highlights kind of the way that we like to work. We always say depth over breadth. For us, it's how far we can take this technology, and as a small startup, that really comes with focus again. In the case of working with Daniel Flagger's team, for example, just to go through some highlights, starting with the chat experience, I think we're able to ingest and pull out some of those portfolio metrics, but the UX is, again, not great. Sometimes you just want a table. Speaking of tables, that was another thing that we discovered we really need to handle well, is how do we parse charts, tables, graphs, and that sort of thing, which became a whole project, which is now a core part of our product. And then, the more and more you dig with LLMs, the more work there is to do. So the next thing we discovered is, okay, there's specific types of charts. How do we handle those? How do we handle false positives? How do we handle time values, meaning it's quarter 1 or quarter 2 or year 2, etc. All things that do not come out of the box with LLMs. And then the last thing is, again, how that filtered into the company page, right? How do we organize this information? And this just sort of follows what our users need. We're very focused on the application side of things, where we want this to just drop into the hands of a user and it should just work. I think somebody said on the panel, but you don't want your users to think about which model you're hitting or which RAG technique you're using to get this information. At the end of the day, we're trying to serve a user with a job. So what's next for us? I think again, in about 4 months or so, we're really excited about the traction so far. I think there's just so much more work to do in this space. That said, we are live with our early funds. For example, we have a private equity group that's about 25 million under management, and it's rolled out to about 250 users that's running through these features right now. We meet with them all the time because we want to understand how can we keep digging with this feature set and this technology to really at this point get time out. And I think that's the last comment I'll make, is that at this stage, so many of the vertical focuses are about time efficiencies, plugging into existing workflows and making people faster. But in the context of an investor, how can we start to surface better investment decisions? How can we start to surface things that you would have missed even if you had all of the time in the world? And there's so much interesting information to play with in this respect. In our view, there's no reason why you couldn't run your entire investment cycle on Metal in the future, and we're starting with diligence and portfolio management. So thanks so much. Hopefully that was interesting.
All right, and we have our last presentation from LastMile. Coming up next, you are the thing between the wine and the food.
Oh, no.
So make it great. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, I'm serious. I'll try to keep it brief, so folks can get some food and drink. So I just want to talk a little bit about. Oops, sorry, one second. How do I switch? There we go. So a little bit about LastMile AI. You probably heard a bunch of this at the panel as well. Our goal is really to build developer tools for software engineers and not just ML researchers to be able to leverage generative AI in a reliable way for production. And so the team basically, we're an early stage startup. We spent a lot of time at Facebook and a couple of other companies building ML infrastructure. And the key observation we had was that generative AI is different because it's software developers who are building AI applications. And so the developer tooling that is needed needs to evolve to accommodate that this much larger demographic that's building AI applications. And it's also hard to productionize applications. I think Rohit mentioned this in his presentation as well. You can get started very quickly. You can have like a prototype up and ready. Even 2 weeks is honestly like an exaggeration. It's pretty easy to get started. But then when you're looking to get this from a proof of concept into production, you have to start thinking of all these different pieces of these tech stack that are really hard to get working properly. Like if you're working with data, how is your rack setup done? How is the chunking done? How is the indexing? What's the quality of the embeddings that you're generating? How are you, which models are you using? How have you configured them? Are the prompts reliable? Where are you storing them? And so a lot of things that folks have mentioned already, you have to really like think about that deeply and do it kind of yourself on your own today in order to get something to production. So what we're really working on at LastMile is a couple of issues that hold back productionizing generative AI applications. And so RAG is a big focus for us because that seems to be a very common technique that people are using. And fundamentally, it means I have data and I want to leverage generative AI to get insights on that data or to operate on that data in some way. So what does observability, interpretability, and debuggability of those systems look like? And what are the tools that you need in order to do that well? So concretely, that can be a couple of evaluator models that can give you automated evaluation benchmarks for your application for things like hallucination detection or answer relevance, succinctness, you name it. You can define your own evals, but the current state of the art, which I think will persist, is using ML techniques to evaluate ML systems because it's hard to judge a summarization task without some kind of machine learning in the process. Secondly, there's prompt and model management that, like Rohit mentioned for Portkey as well, is more and more important for folks. And people are like, within large organizations especially, they're sharing these different prompts and strategies on how they're solving a particular task across the organization. So managing that and reusing those capabilities becomes pretty important. And also optimizing those prompts. Someone I think earlier mentioned DSPy, which is all about prompt optimization over some kind of optimization function. So how do you optimize them across the kind of things you care about, and also what's the right model for the right task? Identifying that and then like almost like having a configuration for the generative AI part of your application is important. And so a couple of the tools we're building to help with that range from the building to the debugging and evaluation phase. And I'll go into a little bit of detail for each of these. The first one is AI config. This is a format as well as an SDK and a UI that lets you create a configuration of the generative AI pieces of your application. And so I think someone mentioned that if you're using LangChain or something, your prompts are all in your code. If you reformat the code, like it affects the prompt. And so the fundamental premise we have is prompts are configuration, similar to the model you're using and how you've configured the model. And they should be stored maybe alongside your application code, but not within the code itself. You can reference them in code. And so AI config is a format, it's an open source format that makes that possible in a systematic way. You can Google it afterwards, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit. And the other two things we're working on is RAG evaluation and debugging. And so specifically it's about identifying and helping root cause issues that are happening in the RAG pipeline. And the pipeline involves like the ingestion of your data, transforming it, chunking it, all of that, as well as the query phase of it. So it's actually like, in the simplest case, it's still two separate pipelines. And so we're building tools that help you have visibility and observability across the end-to-end state. So that when you know that like you have a set of cases that don't work well, like a user asked a question and the model returned a bad response, how do you trace that all the way back to the problem, whether it was like how the data was ingested or the wrong context was passed in or the model didn't do a great job. There are so many different areas that can break down. So I mentioned AI config a little bit. It does separate the generative AI pieces of your application away from your application logic. So the application is then just the business logic, and it invokes the prompts. It can use an AI gateway, it can use other things, but fundamentally you're storing those things in the configuration. You can version control this config, you can manage this wherever you want to manage prompts. We're not opinionated about that. And you can actually edit this config in a Playground environment. We have a VS Code editor that you can install as an extension that just gives you a Playground editor for your configs. And it's just pretty similar to like the OpenAI Playground, but the same idea applies that you can like try out Llama or Mistral or OpenAI models all in one place. And when you save it, you get that JSON or YAML config that then you can reference in your application code. The other thing I mentioned is auto eval. So we actually have our own fine-tuned evaluator models that we're using and we're providing in order to help with evaluation of RAG systems. So we've already had evaluator models for answer relevance and for hallucination detection. Specifically, it's faithfulness, which is you get given the context, the user query, and the model's response, can you score how faithful the LLM was to the data that was provided it? And what we found is actually encoder models can be trained to outperform the state of the art today. So GPT-4 is the current state of the art. You ask GPT-4 to evaluate the model's response, but we've trained our own BERT-based encoder models that let you do that at like 1,000th of the cost, and also at actually better performance. So we have a couple of benchmarks. These are the popular ones out there. There's HalUEval, there's WikiEval, and then we actually built our own synthetic data set that's a lot harder to beat for some of the tests that we do for hallucination detection. And we at least match, even on the zero-shot case, and actually exceed the performance on, if we fine-tune the encoder model for your specific RAG application. And then the debugger is more of both a user experience. So there's an open telemetry-based like tracing system that you can use to trace out the entire RAG application. And then it basically is, the idea is to compare different experiment runs systematically and being able to identify the best parameter set is like basically the configuration of your RAG application that is going to perform better in certain cases that we hear about. I mentioned test-driven development earlier in the panel, and so the idea here is you define a test set, which is the series of questions, for example, in a RAG application that you would care about. We may even provide ground truth data on what you expect good answers to look like. And then you have some eval functions that evaluate the performance of running those tests and getting results. And then you can, like, as you tweak your application, each gets logged as a new experiment, and then you can like compare across them and identify what configuration of like embedding model or chunk size or prompt yielded the best performing result. And that can both be graded by humans, it can be graded by models, it can be a combination of the two. And And last but not least, we're hiring. I will be remiss to mention this. So please reach out to me. I put my email here directly as well. We're only hiring for technical roles, and especially for building infrastructure and some interesting ML research projects we've got underway. So yeah, thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing from some of you.
All right, everyone. I just want to say thank you to all of our demos, our speakers, on behalf of our team at Flybridge. Flybridge, we talked about earlier, is an early stage VC based here in New York and Boston. So if you're a builder and you're looking for someone to test your ideas with before you're ready to pitch investors, I am head of community and platform. I was also a Flybridge founder myself, so I know what they're looking for, especially now that we're building AI companies. If you're also looking for a partner to host events with, Portkey is one of our portfolio companies, and we were so excited to partner with them to bring this event to each of you alongside Gunderson. So if you're looking for a way to connect with other builders in this space, you can also reach out to us at Flybridge via myself or my colleague Daniel. We want to give you guys plenty of time to connect with each other. There are a lot of brilliance and people in the room, and so we want to make sure we have space for that. So there's new food and beverages out there, and we have another 45 minutes or so for you to connect. Thank you.
You have the right amount of confidence. Under the view is very good.